Hi, my name is Indrawan, and in this video I'm gonna be explaining about an informed approach. So before that, I'm gonna tell you about the contents of this video. The first one is enlightened electric approach. The second is communicative language teaching. It consists of the first one, learner-centered instruction. The second is cooperative and collaborative learning. The third is interactive learning. The fourth is whole language education. The fifth is content-based instruction. And the last is task-based instruction. So let's get started. An informed approach. We had learned to be cautiously eclectic in making enlightened choice of teaching practice at the end of the 1980s. Language teaching and designing effective tasks were informed by approach. Today we found that language learners have demand an eclectic blend of tasks. What is an enlightened eclectic approach? It should be clear from the foregoing that as an enlightened eclectic teacher. However, sometimes some teachers having no experience about teaching so that cannot have their own approach to language. On the other hand, the teacher that having no experiences, they apply by pedagogical process such as the first, which side of continuum of possibilities you would generally to lean toward, and the second is why would you lean that way, and most important, and the third is what contextual variables might influence a change away from your general inclination. So a teacher that have no experience in teaching, they may find a potential choices, like when they have to, when they found that language classes should focus on whether in grammatical or meaning. And then the second is student learned best by using plenty of, they may find potential choices like whether it's analysis or intuition. And the third is it's better for a student to maybe they may find a potential choices like think directly in the second language or use translation from first language, and much more potential choices. In an enlightened lecture approach, your approach will differ on various issues from that of college, of yours, or even a supervising teaching. There are two reasons for variation at the approaching level. The first one is an approach is by definition dynamic and therefore subject to some tinkering as a result of one observation and experience. The second is research in second language acquisition and pedagogy that are not conclusive but subject to interpretation. Let's move on to the communicative language teaching. So in communicative language teaching, all of these theoretical interests underline what we can best describe as communicative language teaching. For the sake of simplicity and directness, we offer the following 6 interconnected characteristics of a description of CLT or communicative language teaching. The first is classroom goals are focused on grammatical discourse. The second is language technique, and the third is fluent and accuracy, and the fourth is using language predictively and receptively. The fifth is students are given opportunities to focus on their own learning process, and the sixth is the role of teacher is that of facilitator and guide. In communicative language teaching, there are 6 characteristics underscore some major departures from earlier approaches. In some ways, those departures were a long stretch of history. In other ways, those departures were radical. Structurally, grammarly sequenced curricula were a mainstay of language teaching for centuries. Communicative language teaching suggests grammatical structure might better be subsumed under various functional categories. And it is important to note, however, that fluency should be never encouraged at the expense of clear, unambiguous, direct communication. Much more spontaneity is present in communicative classrooms, such as students are encouraged to deal with unreached situation under the guidance but not control of the teacher. And finally, teachers' facilitative role in communicative language teaching is the productive to decade, or more slowly recognizing the importance of the learner initiative in the classroom. Some of the characteristics of CLT make it difficult for a non-native speaking teacher who is not very proficient in the second language to teach effectively. And dialect drills, rehearse, exercise, and discussion of grammatical rule are much simpler for some non-native speaking teacher to contend with. Technology can aid such teacher. Moreover, in the last decade or so, we have seen a marked increase in English teacher proficiency level around the world. At the beginning of this section, it was noted that a yes to CLT needed to qualify. So let's move on to the comparison of the audiolingual method and communicative language teaching. So based on their definitions, audiolingual method is a method for foreign language teaching which emphasizes the teaching of listening and speaking before reading and writing. In the communicative language teaching is a language teaching approach based on the linguistic theory of communicative competence. So the first is learner-centered instruction. There are two kinds of instructional models. The first is teacher-centered and second is learner-centered instruction. So in the learner-centered instruction, it includes, the first is techniques that focus on or account for learners' need, style, or goals. Second is techniques that give some control to the students. And the third is curricula that include the consultation and input of student and that do not presuppose objective in advance. And techniques that allow for student creativity and innovation, and techniques that enhance a student's sense of competence and self-worth. Let's move on to the cooperative and collaborative learning. What is that? So cooperative and collaborative learning is a teaching and learning strategy where students are grouped together to scrutinize a particular assignment or topic to maximize their own and each other learning. So cooperative learning is where teams of students with various abilities and skills work together on different activities to learn about a subject. So it's like this. Groups will stay together for weeks, months, or a year, and groups should be 2 till 5 people in size. And what about collaborative learning? Collaborative learning is commonly illustrated when groups of students work together to search for understanding, meaning, or solutions to create an artifact or product of their learning. So next is interactive learning. What is interactive learning? So interactive learning is a pedagogical approach that incorporates social networking and urban computing into course designing and delivery. Interactive learning has evolved out of the hyper-growth in the use of digital technology and virtual communication, particularly by students. So what about whole language education? Language should be taught as a whole. It was developed to help young children to learn how to read and write in a natural way as the same way they learn their native language. So the last is task-based instruction. What is task-based instruction? So while there's a good deal of variation among experts on how to describe or define task, Peter Schickhand's in 1998 concept of task seems to capture the essentials. So the first one is meaning is primary. And the second is there's some sort of relationship to comparable real-world activities, and there's some communication problems to solve, and task completion has some priority. The assessment of the task is in terms of outcome. So in task-based instruction, a task is really a special form of technique, and task may be synonymous. And task-based instruction is not a new method. Task-based instruction is a perspective within a communicative language teaching framework that forces you to be careful, consider all the technique. So when we consider all the technique, we have to pay attention to the do they ultimately point learners beyond the forms of language alone to the real world context, or do they specially contribute to communicative goal, or are their elements carefully designed and not simply haphazardly or idiosyncratically thrown together? Or are their objectives well specified so that you can at some later point accurately determine the success of one technique over another? Or do they engage learners in some form of going problem solving activities? So I think that's all the explanation for me about the material of an informed approach. I'm so sorry if there's a lot of mistakes that I made in this presentation. And thank you for watching. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.